The only black folk allowed in there to help.
Now, they may not like it, but they're not gonna say no to Sal Marcano.
Sal Marcano, head of the Marcano Crime Family. When we're first introduced to Sal Marcano is in the year of 1968 through the eyes of Lincoln Clay, a Vietnam War veteran who was planning to only come home for a few short days in order to give his final goodbyes to Sammy and Alice Robinson. They had taken him in as an orphan kid, so they were the closest thing he had to a family. After Lincoln's tour in Vietnam, he intended to stay in the city of New Bordeaux to just say his goodbyes. Then he planned to head over to California and establish a new life for himself, far from the ghosts, painful memories, or danger that he may get sucked into due to his adopted father, Sammy Robinson's position as head of the Black Mob in the Delray Hollow district of the city. Though this video is not meant to be centered around Lincoln Clay, or the full destruction of the Marcano crime family. We've already covered that before in great detail. So today, just as before with the Salieri and Morello crime families, we'll be going into the early days of what we know about the Marcano crime family, how Sal and his two brothers took out the head of the family who previously reigned over the city of New Bordeaux, and how their subsequent power moves were expertly executed to tighten their control over each district of the city and its politicians. How Sal and his brothers eventually commanded the city, making sure nothing came in or exited without Sal's knowledge and approval, all the way to the moment Sal began to shift into going legitimate, fearful of the dangers of this life, eventually claiming his son just as it had his brother, only to make selfish and life-changing mistakes along the way, giving ammunition to previous associates of his to rally, band together, and strip away Sal's empire and family one by one, until Sal was finally killed himself. Before Marcano was a widely known name, the name that lingered in the back of everyone's mind was Carillo, Giuseppe Carillo, Don of the Carillo crime family. The man was described as the most powerful mobster of his time, establishing rackets all over the city of New Bordeaux, organizing a payroll filled with the names of political figures, police officers, and eventually going on to commanding a heavy influence over citywide operations. By the time Valerio Marcano, father of the eventual Don Sal Marcano, joined the Carillo crime family as a foot soldier in 1914, the Carillo family was effectively ruling the city of New Bordeaux with an iron fist. As time went on, Valerio served as a typical enforcer for the family. Characteristically, he was unremarkable. The man came to be known as a heavy drinker and habitual gambler, eating into all the money he's ever earned and racking up more money than he could ever hope to pay back Don Carillo. In 1926, Valerio's then teenage sons Sal, Lucio, and Lou would arrive in New Bordeaux to live with their father, who was calling a rundown wooden shack on the edge of the River Road district his home. Now, timelines and stories become a little muddled from this point forward, but what is known is each of Valerio's sons were far more ambitious than he ever was. All three of them would find various ways to earn some kind of money. Lou, the oldest, would get his money by slinging dope. Sal, meanwhile, went on a streak of breaking and entering all around the French War district. Lucio, the youngest of the trio, did seem to take a little more after his father than his brothers. Now, he pretty much got into the same amount of trouble as them, as he would go on to serve time inside the state penitentiary at Cordoba, just as Sal and Lou, sharing in his brother's ambitions to an extent. However, he was like his father in terms of being unremarkable. Lou was considered to be the brawn, Sal was the brain, and Lucio was deemed just a follower. Perhaps there was still some power in being able to obey orders without asking questions, but for the most part, the other two had a much more commanding presence. Regardless, at some point, all three of them did serve time at Cordoba, with the most crucial which being during Sal's prison sentence. Sal would not only meet Don Carillo and become close friends with his father's boss during his prison stint, but he would even save the Don's life when someone attempted to kill him with a shank. Grateful, Don Carillo would induct Sal into the Carillo crime family when they were both released from prison. After this, there isn't much information on whether if all three brothers worked under the Carillo crime family or really what the time was like for Sal as an enforcer, but considering at the age of 17, almost immediately after coming to the city of New Bordeaux, Sal and Lou were already looking for opportunities to get some kind of money together. One can only imagine how well it was really going for Sal. Now, as Sal turned out to be a great addition to the Carillo crime family, Valerio, on the other hand, was becoming a bigger problem by the day. His debt and his drinking was no longer excusable. Now, out of courtesy, instead of outright killing Valerio, Don Carillo instead decided to go to Sal and offer a deal. The Don owed Sal for saving his life in prison, and he was willing to pardon Valerio's debts in order to square things with him and Sal. All Sal had to do was accept. But surprisingly, Sal refused to accept, knowing the rejection of this offer will seal the fate of his father. And it did. Don Carillo would order the murder of Valerio Marcano, and Sal saw that as a perfect opportunity to fracture and dethrone Carillo. Using his father's death, Sal would portray Valerio's murder as a betrayal by Carillo. He would rally his brothers to avenge their father and take the city of New Bordeaux as their own. Sal would be successful at persuading his brothers to declare war against the Carillo crime family, but he didn't stop just there. Sal would also go on to sign a deal with Enzo Conti. Enzo was now a lieutenant in the Carillo crime family, but that wasn't always the case. Enzo started his early days in New Bordeaux, hitting many businesses owned by Carillo, particularly his extremely lucrative bootlegging operation out in the bayou. Eventually, Don Carillo's enforcers caught up to him. Don Carillo would see potential in Enzo due to the amount of losses in men, money, and merchandise that the man inflicted on his businesses, so he offered him somewhat of a deal. A chance to either be shot in the head and dumped in a shallow grave or work with the Carillo crime family. Enzo chose the latter and has been with the family since. But now he was allied with the Marcanos. It was a combined effort to take this Don down, an incredible feat that was achieved in less than a year. It was said the Marcanos declared their war against the Carillo crime family in 1934. 1934 is the same year Giuseppe Carillo would be killed in an infamous hit the city forever remembered as the All Saints' Day Massacre. Publicly, it was an expertly carried out hit. Newspapers as late as 33 years after the event described as 6 men armed to the teeth exiting a vehicle, standing at the entrance of an upscale Italian restaurant in the French Ward District, and opening fire on all of the occupants inside. Accounts claim the gunfire was timed perfectly, while fireworks were going on outside, visually and audibly distracting and dazzling onlookers. The gunmen opened fire, killing Don Carillo and 18 of his closest men who were with him. The 6 gunmen then left as soon as they arrived. There were never any persons of interest, motives, or suspects. The who and why were anybody's guess. Despite most looking at the Marcanos as being responsible, nothing was ever actually set in stone. Behind closed doors, though, was an entirely different case. 3 of the gunmen were actually Sal, Lucio, and Lou. They knew that was Giuseppe's favorite restaurant, and the French Ward District was Lou's den of sorts since he had got out of prison. He had established himself as a pimp and opened up shops intended to continue his earlier work with drugs, mixing the two into a perfect blend of getting high while indulging in promiscuous activity. And considering the French Ward District was the prime location for the city entertainment, bars, clubs, and it held where Mardi Gras was, it was a perfect way to make money in the best spot of the city to do it in. It was an extremely clever move. And then in hindsight, that district has to hold a symbolic place for the brothers. All of them sunk their teeth into some kind of trouble here. They killed the previous Don here, and Lou would continue to implement his brothels and drug operations to great effect, holding power over the city's highest officials when the Marcanos would eventually run the city. But in these early days, preparing the hit on the Don, one can only imagine how many spies that were planted or people that were bought off to look the other way or spill some type of information to the brothers to be able to successfully execute the hit and do it as cleanly as they did. The death of Giuseppe Carillo meant the end of the Carillo crime family, and with that came the era of the Marcano crime family. New Bordeaux's criminal activity would be launched to new heights like never before. Sal took the helm as the Don, and he established his brothers as capos within his newly founded empire. From the beginning, the organization was tightly controlled and rewarded for loyalty. Enzo Conti, as an example, was gratefully placed in charge of the Barclay Mills district of the city, overlooking the rail yards and waste disposal of the city. Where others saw boring trains and piles of shit, Enzo saw a gold mine. Carillo and Sal were wise to see potential in him. Conti would keep the district running like a well-oiled machine. He was loyal, and he enjoyed the position. Lou Marcano, on the other hand, was placed in charge of the French Ward District, where he continued businesses like before, but now he was completely free to do whatever he so pleased. In fact, Lou became in charge of grooming politicians and the city's elite. He would go on to establish ties to various influential figures within New Bordeaux, including politicians, lawyers, bankers, and merchants, using his accountant Tony D'Orazio to bribe corrupt city government officials. As a side note, Tony D'Orazio was a peculiar man who seemed a bit off. a cold-blooded psychopath that rarely left his private suite in the downtown district of the city. Despite his oddities, he quickly became one of Sal's favorite lieutenants, as no one could handle the complex personalities in City Hall like Durazio could, and no one had the genius levels as he did. Durazio was so talented with numbers, all of the organization's rackets ran through him, laundering every single penny of Marcano's so thoroughly that even the federal government believed every single penny was legitimate. Durazio was a useful tool in Lou's venture to have every politician in his pocket. On top of that, Lou was careful to craft an Uncle Lou persona. His face became synonymous with any kind of entertainment and tourism in New Bordeaux. Lou would even go to voice a video promoting traveling to New Bordeaux and all the city has to offer in historical significance, cuisine, or relaxing vacation opportunities. He would go on to build all of his rackets in the French Ward District for the VIP and special clientele privileges, offering more quote-unquote exotic choices to anyone that was willing to pay the right amount of cash. Lou expanded into legitimate businesses such as bars, restaurants, and becoming the face of the district itself while behind closed doors promoting all this illegal activity and working very closely with his brother Lucio. Lucio was placed in charge of the Frisco Fields district. After the killing of Don Carillo, Lucio helped Lou organize prostitution rackets all around the city, building up some high-class and rich clientele specifically in Frisco Fields. It was during this process of him and his brother consolidating their power and weeding into every corner of the city that Lucio would end up meeting and dating a woman by the name of Olivia Grady. Olivia was a young, rich Irish-Italian woman, and despite her parents despising Lucio due to his very apparent obvious position as being a pimp and pusher, taking a much more straightforward look than his older brother Lou, the two of them would marry in 1949. Following their marriage, Lucio would continue to get Olivia more and more involved in the Marcano family businesses and would often take her with him to businesses involving fast cars, automatic weapons, as well as drugs. Olivia herself would become quite fascinated with this lifestyle. She had her own money. She would just fall in love with the thrill of danger, later describing it all as having a tinge of romanticism tied to it. With the seemingly most important and lucrative districts of the city under their firm control, Sal made an intelligent move to incorporate the rest of the city. Instead of launching a hostile takeover in the other districts of the city, risking wars, putting more lives at risk, or even inspiring racially motivated moves against one another, as that is a deep-seated issue here within the city, Sal opted to cooperate with the other criminal organizations to an extent, particularly the poorer districts. Delray Hollow was placed under the control of the Black Mob. The population in that district was predominantly African American or Haitian. Anyone deemed white or light-skinned would automatically be distrusted. So it made more sense to just have everything run much smoothly under the Black Mob, and they'll just provide kickback to Sal Marcano. While the district was still under the heel of some type of powerful criminal organization, at least there was no racial divide behind that. And the leader of the Black Mob was Sammy Robinson, whom Sal Marcano had known for decades. In a situation not entirely different from the Delray Hollow district and the Black Mob, save for the volatile nature of race, Sal would have the district of Point Verdun run by Thomas Burke. Thomas was a moonshiner whose operation eventually caught the eye of Sal Marcano. Thomas was also head of the Irish mob, so it made sense for Sal to let the district be overseen by Thomas and the Irish mob in exchange for a small kickback of their revenue. At this point in time, Thomas was a loyal soldier to Sal, just as Sammy Robinson and Enzo Conti were. So even if they were weaker gangs operating their territories at their own discretion, they still equally aimed to please Sal. It also granted Sal the opportunity to do something no one else has ever been able to do before. That was seize total control of New Bordeaux's ports and all the rackets tied to it. Since the city was a major port located in the southeastern coast of the United States, it was a vital smuggling route from the Caribbean and Latin America into the United States. Pirates, bootleggers, and smugglers have been fighting over the turf over the years with no official dominant force claiming ultimate authority. That was until the era of the Marcano Crime Family. Gaining total control of the port while establishing his brothers as capos running major rackets, installing loyal and well-paid lieutenants in charge of secondary rackets, all helped Sal starve out any potential competition and prevented any newcomers from gaining a foothold within what is now effectively Sal City. I want to quickly take this opportunity to mention the youngest and last Marcano brother, Tommy. While Lucio, Lou, and Sal were getting into trouble in New Bordeaux, Tommy was repeated in the 6th grade for his own disobedient behavior. By the time Sal had New Bordeaux in the palm of his hands, Tommy was finishing up high school, and his brother Sal initially wanted him to have no part in this dangerous life that he, Lou, and Lucio lived. Sal pushed Tommy to get into law school, craft himself an education, and do something worth being proud of. He would even offer to foot the bill for all of Tommy's school fees. Tommy, however, rejected the offer, and he wanted to be a part of ruling New Bordeaux, which is effectively a family business at this point. And so the brothers would come to some type of compromise. At some point in time, Sal would begin to look beyond the city of New Bordeaux and establish casinos down in Cuba. And it's when he opens these casinos, in Havana specifically in the late 1940s, that Sal would place Tommy in charge of them. Down in Cuba, Tommy would excel at running the casino businesses. The money would be rolling in like never before, and in a way repeating what his brothers did in New Bordeaux, Tommy would even manage to keep the local police completely pacified, placing the police chief on his payroll. Thanks to his brother's guidance and Tommy's own drive to prove himself, the Marcanos would have another solid stream of revenue and another experienced capo here within the organization. Tommy would stay down in Cuba until the Cuban Revolution forced him out of the country, shutting down the mob, ran casinos in the process, and Tommy eventually ending up in New Bordeaux, running the South Downs district, where he continued to thrive. Tommy was described as having an entrepreneurial vision, and he would utilize that to help diversify the gambling and black market rackets that were already established there. Tommy revitalized, restructured, and eventually created new ones. All of this was done so efficiently by the man that a process was created in of itself. Tommy could build, establish, and structure the new rackets to a point where they could be left effectively ran by other people while he took a back seat. As the Marcanos' rackets grew, revenue increased, and power became boundless. Unfortunately for Sal, this newfound money and power would cause new problems and an eventual erosion of his own nerves and stomach for this lifestyle. To begin, due to the immense amount of revenue and New Bordeaux having a true central power in the criminal underworld for once, the commission would begin to take notice, and they wanted a slice of the pie. For those unaware, to put it plainly, the commission serves as a governing body of the Mafia families. It's meant to settle disputes and oversee all of the families. By the time the Marcanos are in power, the commission has changed quite a bit, and luckily, or rather unluckily for Sal, an event had recently transpired in the city of Empire Bay, providing the commission with a very delicate dilemma and a unique opportunity for both the commission and Sal Marcano. A man by the name of Vito Scaletta is meant to be exiled from Empire Bay. He damn near launched a war single-handedly by ignoring what his superiors told him to do and what friends warned him not to do. In the end, Vito was a made man, and he ended up killing Don Falcone for the commission, so they spared him, but they still needed a place to send him to. New Bordeaux seemed like a distant world away from Empire Bay, so acting on behalf of the commission, Leo Galante, consigliere of the Vinci crime family, would broker a deal with Sal Marcano. If Sal agreed to take Vito into his organization along with anyone else they sent to him, and Sal provided the commission a 20% kickback of all revenue that he generated, then Sal would never hear from the commission, and he would be allowed to continue to run New Bordeaux however he saw fit. Dealing with an entity far more powerful than him, Sal saw no other option than to accept. Now 20% is quite a lot of cash, adding pressure onto the powerful Don, but it was made all the more unbearable by having to deal with Vito. Sal didn't like the guy, and he believed the commission put him here to just keep an eye on him and report back to the commission if Sal got out of line or did anything the commission would have deemed unacceptable. Since Vito was a made man, there was nothing Sal can do about him until Vito screwed up or Sal found a perfect way to get him to screw up, giving Sal an opportunity to, in essence, get the commission's blessing to kill Vito. It was a balancing act Sal almost immediately got to work doing by placing Vito in charge of what is considered to be the poorest and most rundown district in the whole city, River Row. The same district Sal once lived out of a rundown shack with his brothers and alcoholic father. Now this took place in 1953, beginning a very long run of Sal slowly making it harder and harder for Vito to come up with the right amount of revenue to make sure Sal doesn't achieve getting rid of him. As if that wasn't bad enough, a couple years later in 1957, Sal would suffer a personal loss. That was the year his wife passed away. Now it's not really said much anywhere in the game, but it's worth mentioning because with the death of his wife, Sal became closer to his one and only son, Georgie. Now initially during this time, he would also begin to mold Georgie as his protege and underboss, preparing him for the life that he essentially lives. At this point in time, if everything goes according to Sal's plans, Georgie would become the next don of the Marcano crime family, inheriting everything his father has built, and maybe even building it to heights like never before, similar to what his father did when he took over the remains of Carillo crime family. And that's the trajectory Sal and Georgie were headed in until 1962. In 1962, Lucio Marcano would be killed by having his throat slit. Lucio's wife, Olivia, would go on to claim Lucio's throat was slit by one of his disgruntled prostitutes. However, Sal and many others would believe Olivia was behind Lucio's assassination, whether by thrill of taking a life, wanting to take control of Frisco Fields herself, or both. Lucio's death would see Olivia take over his duties. As business continued, as usual with her in the district, Sal, on the other hand, would later admit that he had nightmares for a month after Lucio's death. They were recurring, varying in terms of his own death and helplessness, but the one that popped up every 3 to 4 days was his son Georgie's funeral. Sal would describe the dream where Georgie was quote-unquote laid in that shitty little casket, net cut same as Lucio's, and whenever that dream came up, he wouldn't be able to sleep for the next 3 to 4 days when the dream would occur again. Watching his son grow up inside his shadow, beginning to deal with the commission, Vito Scaletta, and starting to suffer horrible nightmares, over time Sal would begin to acknowledge that he hasn't had a decent night's rest in some 40-odd years, and so he would make the decision of exiting this life and going legitimate, driven by the determination to make sure Georgie would not end up being a victim of the mob lifestyle. Sal made the decision to screw over his many loyal associates in an effort to avoid his son ending up just like his brother. At some point between 1962 and 1968, Sal decided enough was enough. He began to wrap up his rackets and continuously look for new sources of revenue to buy his freedom. The man desperately wanted to get out from under the commission's control and stop looking over his shoulders or worry about his son's fate. Sal would come to believe the way to go legitimate was by building a casino, a vision that brought a variety of new problems. For one, the commission was meant to be kept in the dark about Sal's intentions to go legitimate. The construction of the casino had to be kept a secret because if the commission caught wind of it, they would want a piece, and hence destroying a vital component of why Sal wanted to build the casino to begin with. The secrecy of the casino's construction meant Sal required unity, loyalty, and efficiency. Gambling in the state of Louisiana was illegal, meaning Sal would have to not only pay an incredibly high price for the land, building material, and permits, but he would also have to pay for more bribes and senators, city officials, judges, and many other politicians on top of the payroll he already had. And then provide the 20% kickback he owed to the commission, hoping there was never any dip or inconsistencies in what he was paying them to alert them of Sal's plans or what was going on in New Bordeaux. This would explain why Sal would eventually turn on Sammy Robinson, Thomas Burke, and Vito Scaletta. The Marcanos organization was ballooning in revenue and in cost, with Sal becoming punitive and more desperate as prices and cost of everything continued to mount. Mistakes became unforgivable in Sal's eyes. As an example, Thomas Burke had a falling out with Sal in 1966, when Thomas was ordered to illegally import foreign car parts to evade American tariffs. Burke would botch the smuggling job, causing expensive items to be destroyed in the process. In response to this, Sal took over the entire district of Point Verdun, handed it over to his most infamous hitman at the time, Roman the Butcher Barbieri. Barbieri and Thomas had a long history of not being able to stand each other, so in addition to taking over the district from him, Barbieri would also break Burke's leg, permanently crippling the man. Vito Scaletta, on the other hand, was already seen as a mole for the commission, so Sal bided his time, dealing with Vito the same time he would take care of Sammy Robinson and the entire leadership of the Black Mob. And Sal would do it in one fell swoop, even securing the equipment needed to literally be able to print money for himself. The Delray Hollow district was struggling to pay Sal's kickback due to a growing Haitian population targeting rackets of the Black Mob, affecting the money they would owe Sal, who was relying on every single penny for all of his own responsibilities. While he might have been lenient, the Black Mob would go 2 months without paying Sal a single dime, but they would be excused no longer, regardless of Sammy Robinson's friendship with Sal Marcano. And so, we arrive in the year of 1968. Sal Marcano would plan to hit the Federal Reserve, and all these moving parts would finally come into play perfectly for him. For the Federal Reserve job, he would get Vito to front the money, which would leave Vito in a vulnerable position, unable to pay Sal, who would then quickly place his nephew Michael Greco in River, further hindering Vito's revenue potential, which in turn would provide Sal the proper justification to the commission to finally kill Vito. The Black Mob was meant to send some muscle to help with the heist, under the belief that if the robbery is successful, it would pay off their debts and make them squared with Sal. At least that's how it was meant to work until Lincoln Clay arrived. Within a day or two of Lincoln arriving in the city of New Bordeaux, he effectively dealt with the Haitian problem. And Sal Marcano saw Lincoln as someone who was quite useful, so he would provide the Black Mob a second chance without them even knowing. Upon meeting Lincoln Clay, Sal Marcano would offer him a deal. He wanted Lincoln to run the Delray Hollow district, replacing Sammy Robinson and running the district for Sal Marcano. Lincoln would reject this offer out of love, respect, and loyalty to Sammy, unknowingly sealing the fate of the entire Black Mob from Sammy Robinson, Ellis Robinson, Lincoln himself, and Danny Burke, son of Thomas Burke. Thomas and Danny Burke had a part to play in the Federal Reserve heist as well, although it was a very ill-advised decision. Thomas Burke offered his services and put his son up in hopes that with the successful hit of the Federal Reserve, Sal Marcano would be grateful and place Point Verdun back under the control of Thomas Burke. However, all it did was place his son inside the bar of Sammy Robinson when Sal and Georgie Marcano decided to kill everyone inside, burn the bar down, and take the $6 million cash stolen from the Federal Reserve for themselves. And so begins the entire story of Mafia III and the downfall of the Marcano crime family. For those that play the game know, Lincoln Clay survived the gunshot to the head and torching of Sammy's bar. He would recuperate from his wounds, recruit John Donovan, fetch Vito Scaletta out of a freezer, sign a deal with the Haitian mob, and give Thomas Burke a chance to avenge his son. On top of that, provide Enzo Conti an opportunity to escape. The killing and betrayal of Sammy Robinson was a pivotal decision that effectively made it loud and clear to everyone that was paying attention that Sal was burning all his bridges and believed once his casino was built, the money, power, and bribes he had established in New Bordeaux made him untouchable. It gave him and Georgie the freedom to get out of this life that haunted him every single night that his son would one day be killed. The problem was, in an unrelenting drive to make sure that never came to fruition, he actually made it a reality, getting Lou and Tommy killed in the process as no one believed for a second Lincoln Clay had survived.